It is good to be together. It's good to have the body of Christ come together, to see faces we recognize, to see faces we don't recognize, and to realize that God is forever growing His church. We don't grow the church. God does that. In fact, if anything, we can keep it from growing, but we don't make it grow. I'm convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that our job is not to make things grow. Our job is to get out of the way of God so He can make it grow. And so when you and I show up as partners with God every Sunday, saying, God, what is it you want from me today? We put ourselves in a position for Him to use us and for Him to do what He wants to do. As we've been walking through the land, we see that God is constantly speaking to His people. It's not changed. God still speaks to His people. But what we've learned over time is that the land, when you listen, has a powerful message for us. So we moved into Zone 4 today. If you are new to Crossroads, this is what we've been doing. We've been taking the country of Israel, dividing it up into zones, and then examining each one of those zones for Old and New Testament stories that happen there. We show pictures so that you might understand better what it's like and what the people were facing as they lived out those stories. And sometimes the land itself gives us an idea of what it's like. Today we come to the Rift Valley, the eastern side of the state or the country of Israel. The east side is the Jordan River Rift. The Jordan River finds its genesis in Mount Hermon, the melting snow waters of Mount Hermon that begin to flow south. And the picture that you're looking at this morning is you're standing in the north looking south. So you'll notice to your left the Sea of Galilee. And then further south beyond that, about 60 or so miles, the Dead Sea. And then beyond the Dead Sea, following the rift all the way down to the Gulf of Aqaba, which, by the way, is one of the top 10 snorkeling places in the world, has nothing to do with the sermon. Just thought you need to know that. It's amazing. And this Rift Valley is where many, many stories take place in the Bible. So I want you to get a good picture of that from a satellite view today. The picture that you see today is different than the picture of what we're going to see in the story that we'll read today from Genesis chapter 13. If you don't have a Bible, there are free Bibles in the rack, and we would encourage you to read along with us. If you're new to the Bible, welcome to it. Genesis is the first book of the Bible. You probably won't get lost. Genesis chapter 13. We're going to be there in just a little bit, but first I want to give you a picture, a feel, a sense of the Jordan River Valley before we read the story that takes place there. I want you to feel the heat. I want you to feel the lack of oxygen. I want you to walk with me when I trekked this hillside in 120-degree heat, barely able to breathe. I want you to step into the waters of the Dead Sea that contain 39% salt as opposed to the Pacific Ocean and Atlantic at about 7%. It's hard to walk in the Dead Sea because your legs naturally want to float up. You can't sink in the Dead Sea. What made this Dead Sea? Is this what it looked like 4,000 years ago when Abram and Lot came into the area? This is the picture that we're working with. The valley descends 1,000+ feet below sea level. It is the lowest place on earth. The very word Jordan, or the Jordan River Rift, is yarad in the Hebrew, which means to go down. You'll notice throughout Scripture, whenever anybody is moving towards Jerusalem, oftentimes the word aliyah in the Hebrew is associated with it. It means to go up. Whenever you're going to Jerusalem, whether physically you're going down, you're always going up to Jerusalem. But whenever you notice the word Jericho or any of the places that are involved here in the Jordan River Valley, you're going down to Jericho, Yarad. So it means to go down. It is the very depths of the earth. I don't know, I don't understand all of the geology. I have studied it. That doesn't mean I understand it. And some of you who are more geologically minded might find this fascinating. But I don't know if it's because of its closeness to the core of the earth, but I think it's more this, that the river valley, the rift, is actually the joining of two tectonic plates. It is the Arabian plate combining with the African plate. And so if you were raised on the Pacific Rim, you know what happens when plates come together. They rub, and when they rub, they make sounds, and they shake. If you're from central Idaho, you really know what that feels like. But there are earthquakes that are seismically recorded on a daily basis, felt on a weekly basis, and about every 100 years, leveling everything in the valley. Earthquakes are commonplace. So if you can feel it, it's hot. You have the Salt Lake. You have earthquakes. Even Amos and Zechariah refer to the many earthquakes that take place there. So underground, there are many thermal springs. There are, recorded 4,000 years ago in the Bible, many asphalt pits or tar pits. In fact, even today, you have a form of tar that seeps up from the earth through the Dead Sea and onto the surface. In fact, the Romans in the first century called the Dead Sea asphaltitis because, well, asphalt is where we get the word. It was bitumen is the word that it was given. Bitumen was a tar-like substance. In fact, it's even recorded in about the 2nd century or 3rd century. Maybe it was 4th. It doesn't matter. There was a monk, and he was in the area, and he decided that he wanted to fast and pray for a month, and so he actually got on top of one of these floating tar hunks and floated there for a month on the Dead Sea. They get big. But still today, they will scrape that and use that for asphalt. If you go to the Sea of Galilee today, you'll go into an area right near Capernaum, and they have a little museum that contains what they're calling the Jesus boat. It was in, the lake was down, the Sea of Galilee was down in the late 70s, and a couple of people discovered something sticking out of the ground on the shore. Lo and behold, they dug it up and discovered what is now called the Jesus boat, a 1st century fishing boat from Galilee, right in the area where Jesus and his disciples traveled by boat. And so you can go into the museum today and actually see that boat, the remnants of it. And when they uncovered it and tried to restore it, they discovered bitumen on the hull of the boat. So they used this tar-like substance from the Dead Sea. They sold it to countries, especially countries on the coast with navies. And they also used it in their own preparation of boats. So if you can sort of picture this. Now, it's an interesting area. It looks rather desolate, wouldn't you say? Not a lot of life especially there's no life in the Dead Sea, but around the Dead Sea, it's quite hot, it's quite desolate. It's salt covered even up the shore. There are salt formations. I'll show you some more pictures next week of even a distance from the shore. It's quite interesting. But if you follow the rift up and move towards the Sea of Galilee, you'll come to a place where it is believed, and with quite a bit of archaeological evidence, that this is the place where John the Baptist was baptizing, right on the Jordan River, and where Jesus most likely was baptized. And it's just right up from this, right up into the foothills from the rift. We move into the Judean hillside, and you get this. This is a day, it was 120 degrees. I couldn't go any further than this. I could tell you about a spiritual experience I had right before I took this picture. I thought I was going to see Jesus in person. It was hot, and I was overwhelmed. So it was a very significant moment for me as I thought this might be very much one of the places that Jesus himself tried to find shade in the cleft of the rock. But this is the area that we're living in here. This is the heat. I remember jumping into the shade shortly thereafter down in the valley, and it was 108 degrees in the shade, and I thought, whew, that feels good. Is that what it looked like 4,000 years ago? This is what's interesting. As they've done research, and I got this from Jack Beck's book. Well, in the next picture, you're going to see the name of the book, so I forgot the name of it, but you'll see it. They've discovered 5 large cities down in the area archaeologically. Now, what's really interesting is I don't know if at the time the cities were built that the Dead Sea was as big as it was. There was some sort of something there they called the Sea of Salt, or the Salt Sea. But because of the size of the cities, we don't know really how big that sea was. But here's what they've discovered. In and around the ruins of these cities on the shorelines of the current Dead Sea, they have found evidence, in particular, of a graveyard containing 500,000 graves. And lo and behold, as they've continued to dig, they found 2 more sites of similar size. It is estimated that at the time of Abraham and Lot, in this valley right here, as many as 1.2 million people lived. 1.6 million people in Idaho. How in the world could 1.2 million people survive in that area? Things have changed. Things have changed a lot. And we're going to read about in the 13th chapter today of Genesis of what it looked like at the time of Abram and Lot. But what we've discovered archaeologically is that somehow, some way, because of evidence of charred remains, that this whole area burned at about 2091 BC. Interestingly, the same time as Abram and Lot. Chapter 13, Genesis. Abram's just come up from Egypt to the Negev. If you look at the map here, Beersheba, under Beersheba is the Negev. I'll show you the map again. In fact, let me just show it to you again so you can get a picture. The Negev. Notice the difference between the greenery and the Negev desert, wilderness. They're coming back up out of Egypt now into the Negev. Why? Abram has been in Egypt with his wife Sarai. By the way, Sarah, Sarai, Abram, Abraham, you notice the difference. Abram means father of a nation. Sarai means princess. By the time we get to the 17th chapter of Genesis, both of their names get changed because God says something different to them than he said before. When he first called Abram, he says, I'm going to make you a father of a nation. Abram. But in chapter 17, he says, I'm going to make you a father of all nations. Abraham means father of all nations. And Sarah means mother of all nations. So right now, it's Abram and Sarai, and they're living in and around Beersheba, Hebron, the Negev, and Israel. It wasn't called Israel yet, but it was in a drought. It was in a famine. And so in the flesh, and I want to say this, in the flesh, what does that mean? In his own human thinking, without considering God, he decides he's going to go down into Egypt because they have food. And in order to do that, he has to lie, and so that he doesn't get killed. He says to Sarai, you're so beautiful, I want you to tell everybody you're my sister so they won't kill me. And so Pharaoh takes her as his wife. Very awkward part of Scripture. Because it's pretty clear and evident that while there, Abram gets quite wealthy. He's there for quite a while. You do the math, the rest of the math. This is an awkward time. I think Abram is learning some lessons because the Abram who would willingly lie and go into Egypt without first consulting God is a different Abram than we're going to meet in chapter 13. Here we go, chapter 13, verse 1. So Abram left Egypt and traveled north into the Negev along with his wife and Lot and all they owned. Abram was very rich in livestock, silver and gold. From the Negev, they continued traveling by stages towards Bethel. They pitched their tents between Bethel and Ai, where they had camped before. This was the same place where Abram had built the altar, and there he worshiped the Lord again. Lot, who was traveling with Abram, had also become very wealthy with flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle, and many tents. But the land could not support both Abram and Lot with all their flocks and herds living so close together. So disputes broke out between the herdsmen of Abram and Lot. At the time, there were Canaanites and Perizzites living in the area. So finally, Abram said to Lot, let's not allow this rift, this conflict to come between us. We're family. The whole countryside is open to you. You choose. Any section of land you want, and we will separate. If you want the land to the left, I'll take the land on the right. If you prefer the land on the right, I'll go to the left. Okay, can I just stop a moment here? This is not the same guy who was willing to lie about his wife and go into Egypt. He had matured to the place where he had said he is willing to go anywhere because he believed that God and his provision was more important than the promise of the provision from the land. He was willing to go wherever. Look at the Negev. Look at that picture. Does that look productive? No. He was willing to go with God even if it didn't look promising. He had grown in his faith. Verse 10. Lot took a long look at the fertile plains. I noticed he didn't pray. He didn't consult with God. He took a long look at the Jordan Valley in the direction of Zor. The whole area was well watered everywhere. It was? Things have changed. Like the Garden of Eden or the beautiful land of Egypt. Things have really changed. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot chose for himself the whole Jordan Valley to the east of them. He went there with his flocks and servants and parted company with his uncle Abram. So Abram settled in the land of Canaan, and Lot moved his tents to a place near Sodom and settled among the cities of the plain. But the people of this area were extremely wicked and constantly sinned against the Lord. After Lot had gone, the Lord said to Abram, "Now look as far as you can see in every direction, north, south, east, west. I am giving you all this land, as far as you can see, to you and your descendants as a permanent possession. And I will give you so many descendants that like the dust of the earth they cannot be counted. Go and walk through the land in every direction, for I am giving it to you." 4,000 years ago. The word must address our politics. Enough said. 4,000 years ago. So Abram moved his camps to Hebron and settled near the oak belonging to Mamre, and there he built another altar to the Lord. Folks, I believe that this is absolute, factual, historical record. I don't believe that the Bible sets out to be a history book. It's a book of faith. It records the story. But it is fascinating that with the best of our science now, we're discovering that it lines up exactly with what God is putting down in His Word. When you think of Egypt, though, you don't think of well-watered. You think of this. As I was taking that picture, I looked down and saw something out of the corner of my eye. And keeping up with me was a little, about 10-inch cobra. I was going to show you a picture of it, but it didn't come out really well. But it was desolate, dry, a thirsty land, you might say. So what does it mean that he went down in the chapter 12, down into Egypt where it was well watered, or that Lot looked at the land and said it was like the Garden of Eden or like Egypt? Well, if you look at the map today, a satellite photo, you will still see a well-watered area at the head of the Nile River as the Mediterranean meets the shore. Now, in fact, if you go there today, on the Nile River, you'll find these really interesting carvings in the buildings, especially at Elephantine Island and places like that right on the Nile, in and around the area where Moses would have been put into the water. You'll find these things called nilometers. And literally, they are measurements of water depth. Now, you think, this goes back. They would base your taxes on how high the water got. Because based on how high the water got, it spread out to a certain point. And as the water spread out, you could grow crops. But beyond the water's reach, it was desolate. And so we have this reality that there was an area. See, the next picture, you'll see Dory looking down on that particular area. You see the wilderness. You see how desolate is it. And then in the distance, you can begin to see the greenery where the Nile River floods every year. You think of the pyramids of Giza, but this is what you find down in that area. You see, it's not just the water that comes in and floods that area. It brings in such amazing nutrients that they say you can almost stick anything in the ground and it will grow. And every year they count on it. The flooding of the Nile. And based how deep is how many crops you can grow. So is this what he was thinking? I'm not exactly sure. But God says, I don't want you living there, Abram. I want you to move here. Which would you choose? Lot's not so dumb. Let's give the guy a break. You have a lot of flocks. You have a lot of family. Would you choose that? You can find water there if you look real hard. Real hard. The Negev is not a place that people choose to live in. And if you had a choice, and if I had a choice, I can understand why Lot chose the well-watered plains of the Jordan River rift. But there is, in itself, the rift of family. The rift between two families. Where Lot could see the obvious. But Abram had matured to a point where even though he couldn't see provision, he trusted God who was the provider. We need to stop a moment and let that simmer. It's easy to choose the obvious. It's much more difficult to choose the way that God says walk when it doesn't look as good as the obvious. But one is walking by sight. The other is walking by faith. And do you know why the Bible tells us to walk by faith and not by sight? Because we walk by sight and not by faith. Every one of us struggles with the same issue. It is easier to make decisions based on what we can see and touch and measure than to make the decisions of obedience when God says, go. To step into the unknown. To have faith without borders. To walk on water. To do all those things we love to sing about, but actually practically don't really dig doing. I really believe that the rift is here. Abram had come to a place where he said, I'd rather have God without apparent provision than to have abundancy in the midst of wickedness. I'd rather have God without apparent abundancy than to have everything I need and live in the land of wickedness. He had matured in his faith. He trusted God more than he did the land. Let me pause a moment. I think this is a struggle for me. I think it's a struggle for all of us at some point. Some of us are better at it than others. I admire those who seem to simply, almost casually walk by faith. But I'll guarantee you, they didn't always do that. They learned how to do that. And I believe that the ability to walk by faith comes from a deep, settled sense of well-being. I'm loved. Not because of anything I've done, not because I deserve it, not because I earned it, but because God told me he loves me. Isaiah 43, Dory read it this morning. When you pass through the waters, not if. When you pass through the fire, not if. How come God didn't say, because I love you, you don't have to pass through the waters or the fire? He didn't though, did he? And we walk through the waters. And we walk through the fires. But God said, I love you. You're not going to get burned. You're my possession. Jesus even said to his disciples, don't fear him who can kill the body, fear him who can damn your soul to hell. What does he mean by that? Is the worst thing that could really happen to us physical death? I hate to break the news, but unless Jesus comes back, it's going to happen to every one of us. If that's the worst that the devil can throw at us, he better get a new game. God doesn't say, I'm going to rescue you out of life because I love you. He says, I'm going to walk with you through life, and I'm going to help life become meaningful. And in the meaningful moments, as I teach you, you are going to grow and deepen, and the fruit that comes from your life will feed others. Your life will count. Your life will mean something. You're going to live for something bigger than you. And you will be so wealthy in terms of kingdom-mindedness, because people will come to you like a well-watered spring. They're going to come to you because there's living water in your life, because there's a deep, settled sense of peace in your life. You've learned to just trust God no matter what happens. That's Abram. A deep sense of well-being. I'm loved. Trust me, I've heard all the reasons why we shouldn't be loved. I've made my own lists, and many of you have shown me yours. I'll give you 10 reasons why God shouldn't love me. Yeah, he doesn't really care about our lists. You see, God, his very character is love. Go to Psalm 103. Go to the Gospel of John. Go to the epistles of John. You're going to discover there that God's very character is love, so he can't not love. He's love. He can get angry with us. He can judge us. He can do all kinds of things, but he doesn't stop loving us because, well, God so loved the world. Not most of us, not the big majority of us, but the world, all of us, that he gave his son, that we might not perish, but have everlasting life. That's how much he loves us. Not because we earned it, not because we deserve it, but because that's who he is. And until I grasp that, until I fully believe that, I will not have that deep, settled sense of well-being that says, even if you stick me in the Negev, I'll be okay, because you're in charge. That's walking by faith, not sight. I'm tempted to think God is only for those with perfect credit, with unblemished driving records. Oh, I hope not. With tension-free marriages, with valedictorian kids, with successful careers. But I've discovered that he's also the God of the divorced. He's the God of the grieving. He's the God of the confused, the beaten, the bullied. He's the God of the weak. He's the God of the rejected. He's also the God of the arrested. He's the God of us all. And until we grasp his love, we will not be able to truly walk by faith. And faith comes from knowing his love down at the very core of who we are. And Abram had come to that place. He'd come to that place. He'd made some major mistakes. Lot chose the well-watered plain, but God gave Abram the whole land. I was reading Jack Beck. I told you, it's a visual guide to Bible events. I knew I wrote it down someplace. Oh, there it is on the slide, too. How about that? I'm learning things every day, most of the stuff I wrote. Okay, how about that? But Jack talks about this being a very fragile ecosystem. He says it wasn't uncommon for people to grasp and to fight over water rights. You can understand. This is what keeps you alive. But he says, please notice verse 11 of chapter 13. Look, go back there and read that. So Lot, verse 10, Lot took a long look at the fertile plains. But look at verse 11. Lot chose for himself the whole Jordan Valley to the what? East of them. This is what Jack Beck points out. He says, in the book of Genesis, whenever you see the word east, stop. Because it's never a good thing in the book of Genesis to move east. When God called Abram, he said, move west. You thought it originated in the mid-1800s. No, God said, go west, young man. That's what he said. So he moved west. But when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, what does it say? After they were cast out of the garden, they went where? East. After Cain killed Abel, he went where? East. Chapter 11 of Genesis, after the people, the mass population had moved east, they built the Tower of Babel. The book of Genesis emphasizes metaphorically the word east to demonstrate this one thing. You're either moving towards God or you're moving away from God. You're either moving towards dependence on God or you're moving towards dependence on yourself. And so when Lot moved east, we cannot miss the fact that what the writer is trying to tell us is that Lot was moving not towards dependence on God, he was moving towards dependence on himself. His own wisdom, his own ingenuity, his own training, his own abundance, his own bank account, his own worldly wisdom. We know, all of us know, that's the stuff that gets in the way of us walking by faith. But he chose the east. Now, if you're facing a decision today whether to take a job in California or New York, don't say, okay, God says don't move east. I got to go to California. Okay. The metaphor is not the east and west part. The metaphor is move towards dependence on God, not away from dependence on God. That's the metaphor. And that we can all apply to our lives. I'm either doing one of the two. I'm either really just thinking I'm all that. Just give me time, God. I'll show you how good I am at this. Or I'm saying, God, forgive me for thinking I ever was in control. You got this thing. And you've proven to me that you love me. So I'm just going to take a deep breath, do my best, and trust you to lead me. I talked to a man one time, Dennis Bakke. He was on Forbes' list of world's richest people. It reminds me of these guys, Abram and Lot, they were blessed beyond convenience. They had so much stuff they couldn't stay together. They're blessed beyond convenience. There's actually scientific research being done now that there is a place of financial wealth that actually helps us to move forward in life, but there's a fine line to having so much that it actually begins to hinder us over time. Isn't that interesting? Science is backing up what the Scriptures told us all along about where our treasure is. These guys they were blessed beyond convenience. Lot was going, hey, dude, this is not working, but man, I'd love to have that whole valley. Okay, go ahead. So I talked to this guy, Dennis Bakke. He's on the list of world's richest people, and he says, when it comes to tithe, he says, tithe is just God's. I don't even think about that. That's a given. Now, when you're making a couple billion a year, Dennis employs a few people full-time just to figure out where to send his tithe. That's a full-time job for a couple people. I mean, can you imagine being the church that gets his tithe check? Hey, everybody, pizza after church today. Nobody has to tithe. Yay! Pizza every Sunday for lots of Sundays. No, he says, I have to employ people to spread out my tithe so nobody becomes dependent on it. He says, but I don't even think about that. They just do that. They just take it right off the top. He says, my problem is the 90% that God calls me to be a steward of. He says, it wears me out. I'm thinking, well, if you need me to share the burden. He started telling me what it's like to be that rich. He says, you don't realize with a name like Bakke, is there anybody with that name? People know this in other countries. If they kidnap somebody by the last name Bakke, I'll pay the ransom. He said, my whole family has to worry about where they travel. I said, are you kidding me? Nobody wants to steal me. And even if they did, Dory wouldn't pay the ransom. We have no idea the burden of abundancy. And here Lot and Abram are up on this plateau going, I want to sympathize with Lot a little bit here, you guys. I don't think he's just a sinful, horrible guy. I think he's just not learned to walk by faith. And Abram has. No, I'll explain that next week. See, Abram had learned from Egypt, wherever he ended up, God would provide. Even if the land was unpredictable. Lot walked by sight, Abram walked by faith. And a family rift happened when Lot decided enough was not enough. A friend of mine recently went through the death of a parent, and they were talking to the lawyer as they were trying to settle out the will, and the lawyer said something to him that he never forgot. The lawyer said, at death, you can expect everyone in the family to change. Oh, cynical lawyer. Oh, I don't care about anything, I'm just care that mom's in heaven. That's good. You're getting how much? Wait a minute. I'm not getting my fair share? A person who walks by faith just says, God, I don't deserve anything I have anyways. Shh. I'm just enjoying it. You gave it to me. You can take it away. You can return it. But I'm living by faith. The problem is when you live by sight, you got to grasp. You got to hold on. You got to compete. But Abram wasn't interested in fighting. He, like Paul, had learned to be content in every situation. Paul said that in Philippians 4. Let me read it to you, verses 11 and 12. Paul had been through all kinds of things, and he said this in verse 11, not that I have ever had need, for I've learned how to be content. That word there, tapenos, which means to make low, to humble, to trust implicitly God's provision. I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing and with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or an empty one, with plenty or little. He said, I've learned the secret. Here's the secret. Ready for this? For I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can do everything if Christ is giving me strength. No matter what comes my way, if Jesus is there, I'm good. Why? Because I have a deep sense of well-being. I know I'm loved. Not because I deserve it. Oh, I could give you a list, all the reasons why God should not love me. He's rather bored with my list, by the way. He loves me because he's love. He loves you because he's love. So you might as well just fold up your list and stick it in your back pocket because he's not listening. Go to Psalm 103 if you don't believe me. Spend a week there. And then, can I say this in a very kind way? Get over yourself. Seriously? You can't shake it. He loves you. But when you believe that, it'll change the way you live. It did with Abram. So what do we do with this? Well, even in living in a land of want, God can and will bring about his purposes. We're going to sing a song this morning. It's a great song just to remind us of the importance of walking by faith. But walking by faith helps us experience true and lasting provision, as well as the blessings of God. Walking by sight doesn't see beyond the present moment. It grabs for security, and it always ends up not ever quite having enough. God's calling us to trust him and to provide that he'll provide. And he will. But we have to operate out of that deep, settled sense of well-being. We are loved. And when we walk through the waters, they will not sweep over us. When we pass through the fires, we will not be burned. Why? Because he loves us. I hope you believe that. Because the longer you wrestle with that, the longer it will be until you can actually walk by faith. God wants us all to walk by faith. Let's stand. Let's sing.
I lean not on my own understanding. My life is in the hands of the maker of heaven. I lean not on my own understanding. My life is in the hands of the maker of heaven. And I give it all to you, God, trusting that you'll make something beautiful out of me. And I give it all to you, God, trusting that you'll make something beautiful out of me. And I will climb this mountain with my hands wide open. I will climb this mountain with my hands wide open. I will climb this mountain with my hands wide open. I will climb this mountain with my nothing. There's nothing I hold on to. There's nothing I hold on to. Nothing I hold on to. Nothing I hold on. There's nothing I hold on to. Nothing I hold on to. There's nothing I hold on to. Nothing I hold on.
Would you just bow your heads with me this morning and let's just take a second and let those words begin to settle in our hearts. There's nothing I hold on to. I lean not on my own understanding. My life is in the hands of the maker of heaven. I get a sense this morning that there are some here who are right at that crossroads. You're right at that place where the decision is, do I turn hands down towards God, or am I going to turn towards what I see in front of me and grasp? And you're at that place. You're at that place of decision. You find yourself right there this morning. Will you turn towards God, hands down, and say, God, I can't do this, but I'd rather have you and not know the outcome than look towards something that I think I can work out or figure out, and am so tired, and it's so time-consuming, and it's so just leaving me empty and hopeless. God, I pray that this morning for those that are at that place of crossroads, right, where they're ready to make that decision, God, I pray by the power of your Spirit that you would draw them to yourself. Father, that you would draw them to take that step, to make that step and turn towards you this morning. There may be someone here today who that decision is just saying yes to Jesus. It's just saying yes to Jesus and beginning to take the next right step on that journey of faith. That may be exactly where you find yourself this morning, just at that place of saying, I'm going to surrender this area of my life, Jesus. I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to take that next step, and I'm going to begin to follow you. There may be some here that are sensing that I've made such a wreck out of my life. I've messed up so many different ways. I've made such a mess of everything. I'm not sure that God could ever love me. I'm not sure that God could ever restore this. Listen, the God that we serve, his character is love. In the very depths of who he is love. He is a God who specializes in taking the broken things of our lives and beginning to put them back together. And for some in this room today, you need to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that your life is not too broken, but that he loves you. And that he's the one who will take the broken, shattered pieces of your life and begin to put them back together. And you know what the beautiful part is that he shines through those broken pieces. And amazing things begin to happen. So, Father, I pray wherever we may find ourselves today, Lord, wherever we may find ourselves on that journey, Jesus, I pray that today we would choose growth. We would choose maturity, Lord. We would choose taking a step closer to you. And God, would you forgive us? Would you forgive me for the times that I look at a situation and go, no, I think I can do this. I think I want this. Or, Lord, when I make decisions based on what I see and not on who you are and your kingdom. God, this morning we desire more than anything else to respond to your Spirit's promptings. And so, God, I ask this morning that you would help us. You would help us to make that decision. You would help us to turn towards you. You would help us to walk in maturity. You would help us to say yes and begin to take that journey. God, I thank you for this time that we can stop and we can reflect and we can think about these things. And I pray, God, that you would keep working in our hearts, that this would be the beginning of drawing us into a deeper relationship with you, into maturity and following you, even into the land of the unknown and the unpredictable. Lord, we want to follow you. So give us the faith and the boldness to do that. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, as you leave, we feel really strongly about praying for people. And so if anything that you were sensing as we were praying or anything that you heard today, that the Lord's just speaking to your heart, or you sense the Spirit is tugging at your heart, or you're at a crossroads and you would like prayer, we want to pray with you this morning. There's a group of us that'll be down here, and we want to join with you and pray with you this morning as you leave. So please, as some make your way that way, if you would like prayer, just make your way down here, and we will stay and pray with you as long as it's needed. May God bless you guys this week. Go with God as you go.